to the Mango Effect podcast, where every Monday we explore a range of ideas and inspiration that all culminate in designing the lifestyle that we've always dreamed of. Remember, no topics are off limits. We get into the practical, the hypothetical, and the downright juicy stuff. I'm Mindy Rosser, your host and lifestyle cheerleader, and I am excited to be with you here today because we are talking about influence. So what is influence? I think a lot of us have this misconception in our heads of what an influencer is. And when I think of influence and the unmistakable power of influence that's shaping our lives, whether or not we realize it, I think about the people that happen across our path, that we see elsewhere, that we listen to their content, that we read their books, that have some way touched our lives. And it looks different. Like some people touch our lives in really profound ways and it changes the entire trajectory of where our life was headed. Others may influence our lives in more subtle ways. And sometimes it's a lot harder to recognize because we just don't see it. And we just feel like it's part of our everyday life. And so I think when we are talking about influence, there needs to be a little bit more awareness around what influence is. We're being influenced and we're influencing all of the time. It's not something that just happens like, oh, yes, I was just influenced. It's not a moment in time where we think about, oh yeah, that was so influential. I feel so influenced right now. That's not how it happens. So this came to mind for me as I was attending the Influencer Summit last year, hosted by Brendon Burchard. And though many of us don't want to call ourselves an influencer, we still want to have some type of influence on how people think, feel, express themselves, etc. Especially if we have an entrepreneurial bent, or we are on a mission, or we feel very called, or we have this driving purpose, we do want to influence how people think. So for the longest time, I resisted the term influencer because it felt really, really fluffy to me. And I would picture, a 20-something influencer that's sponsored by some brands and is trying to make content and say, look at me, look how pretty I am, look how handsome I am, look how well I can talk, I can share my message. And it just felt so superficial. And it was such a turnoff for me. And so I think the term influencer has gotten a bad rap over time because we've seen so many of these people calling themselves influencers or wanting to become an influencer or become a thought leader. And it just turns us off. It also felt a little bit too trendy. Like, okay, I'm going to be an influencer too. Yeah, okay, add me to the list of 30-somethings that wants to, make money from influencing people. And there was something about that just did not strike me right. But when I was at that Influencer Summit with Brendon Burchard, it was just so impactful because I watched a number of other so-called influencers, and some of them would call themselves influencers, and others of them kind of shied away from the term. But the commonality was that they all were influencing people in a positive direction. They each had their own target audience. They each had a group of people that they were speaking directly to. They were very clear on how they were approaching influence, their message, how their words landed on people. And I think there's something to be learned from that. Whether or not you ever want to be an influencer, you are influencing all the time. Now, you may not be influencing at scale. But even if you are a mom, if you're a dad, if you are a friend, if you're in a relationship, if you're an auntie, an uncle, a parent in your community, you are influencing whether you realize it or not. So I think just being aware that you are influencing and you are always being influenced. So some influencers that come to mind for me that I consider to have impacted my life in profound ways, in some a little more subtle. I may never actually meet them in real life, but they are out there and they have influenced me in some way, shape, or form. And I think there's something to be learned from them. One that comes to mind, Brene Brown. She's a speaker, author on all things vulnerability. If you haven't seen her TED Talk, okay, go watch the TED Talk. Just about everybody on the planet, I feel like, has seen it. And I feel like there has been so much that she has done for us in bringing vulnerability to life, helping us to deal with our emotional baggage, all of that. And that's such a positive influence. And she's left a legacy in helping us work through vulnerability issues. Another person that comes to mind, Glennon Doyle. She's an author of a book called Untamed. Highly, highly recommend it. As someone who has come out later in life, this book was really, really helpful in helping me figure out my orientation, what I was looking for in relationships, kind of kind of dive into those deep, dark places in a way where I felt like I was going on this journey with her. So highly recommend the book. But she is really good at bringing up topics. She has a podcast. I highly recommend it as well. It's talking about doing hard things. So highly, highly recommend, if I haven't said that enough. But if you're looking for ways to influence, everybody's a little bit different in how they influence. And her style is very different from Brene Brown. But they each are speaking to their own communities. They're each speaking to a different group of people, and they're speaking with power. They're speaking from a place of authenticity, and they're also sharing a lot of their personal experience. And that's definitely critical. I think to truly influence people, you really have to dig into the heart of your soul to really extract to those things and be vulnerable, as Brene Brown talks about. Another person that's very influential in the marketing space, Seth Godin. He is a marketing mastermind. I actually joined his Alt MBA program, Alt MBA number 6, which was a really long time ago, back in 2016. And just going through that program and learning more about how he thinks and his thought process, how he approaches the marketplace, even just from a professional perspective, not from a marketing perspective, I learned a ton just about thought processes, decision making, how he goes about influencing people, and the power that influence actually has. Like, we have to recognize that it's not something to be meddled with. It's not something to abuse. It is a responsibility of sorts. Another influential person in the space for digital CEOs, which would be me, is someone you may not know. His name is James Wedmore. He also has a podcast, of course, but he is really powerful in the way that he uses his words and the types of messages that he shares. It's not just about marketing. It's not just about making money, but he kind of weaves in this woo-woo stuff, as he would call it, the Wedmore woo, into his content. And it definitely speaks to his niche in a way that a lot of other so-called marketers and people that help digital CEOs do not do. So everybody here that you've heard me talk about so far has this unique spin on how they see the world, and they are influencing us to help us see things through their perspective, which can be so powerful and impactful. And even just one thing that they have said, one quote, can really change how you look at a topic. And I think applying that to us, it's important to realize that, yeah, we look at these people like, wow, they're influencers. They have these huge followings. They're impacting so many people, but we are influencers too. Maybe not at that scale, but we are influencing the people that we are coming across. And some of us underestimate the power of our own influence. There are a couple of other people like Terrence. Okay, this man is Terrence. He is an ocean man who surfs an ocean kayak at some of my favorite surf spots. He's part of the local community here on the North Shore, and I consider him an influencer because he's influenced me and my family, and he's taken time out of his, ocean activities to teach me and my life partner, Jason, how to understand the ocean, where to sit in the lineup, where to catch the best waves, what the conditions are doing, what the winds are doing. And he's provided a lot of inspiration as we've been learning more about the ocean, learning how to surf over the last couple of years. And so some people would be like, he's not really an influencer. He doesn't have a big following. Most people probably don't know who he is, but he's influencing us in a very profound way that has shaped the trajectory of our surfing activities. So I consider him an influencer. I'll mention one other couple, John and Missy Butcher. You might have heard me mention them before in the podcast. These are the Lifebook founders who are changing the way that individuals are discovering, creating, and embracing their life vision. And they have impacted people around the world. So they have a global mission, which is to help everybody kind of, I would call it self-actualize, because they feel like that is the best way. If they can help 1 million people self-actualize, that will actually change the world from kind of like the outside in, inside out, however you want to look at it. But that's a very powerful mission, and they're doing it at scale in countries all over the world. So we talked about a lot of different types of influencers, some big, some small, some with global missions, some that are really working in niches. And really, how is it that we can embrace being an influencer in various areas of our lives? It's not just professional. It's also personal, like we are influencing people every single time we interact with them. So when I think about influencing, I think about, at work, that's kind of the first natural one that I think about. Whether we're in careers, whether we're working inside of a company, or we're entrepreneurial, or we're leading a business, we are influencing every single interaction that we are having professionally. We are influencing people. that could either be good or bad, or just kind of mediocre, or not really good or bad, just kind of happening. We also influence in our friendships. So truly being a friend and not just trying to say what people want to hear is definitely influencing people and influencing those around us, those people who want to be in our circles. We're also influencing in our intimate relationships. So with our partner or partners, whatever that looks like for you, we are influencing those people that are really, really close to us. And I think this is often underestimated, how much we influence each other. If you think about it, think about the couples that have been together for like 20, 30, 40 years, and you look at them and they almost look similar, like they've kind of aged together, and they almost look like they're in the same family. I mean, they are, but not genetically. And it's interesting to see how their lifestyle choices and how they have, gone about life together has made them look so similar. And it's because of that power of influence. We also have a lot of influence with the children in our lives. So the next generation, whether you're a parent, you're an auntie or an uncle, as we call them on the island here, we're all affecting that next generation. Positive interactions with the younger people in our lives is going to shape the future. And even just one little statement, I can think of some very profound moments back in my childhood where somebody just encouraged me in one area and told me I had a beautiful voice and that I should write songs. And I actually took that and started writing songs. I performed. I did it in front of all of my high school senior class when I was graduating from high school. So there were some really profound moments, but it's because I had one voice teacher who thought I could do it. And she influenced me and just made one comment. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. So it's very powerful when you think about how you're influencing younger people. A lot of what you say, they're going to internalize and they're going to think about it more than we do. Like we say it and we kind of just let it go, but realize it's going to have an impact over time. And one thing you say may affect the entire trajectory of their lives. You never know. Then in our communities, we are also influencing those people around us. Even if we feel like we are not a huge part of the community, we're not doing a bunch of community service, just being out and about in our communities. When I think about my community, it's a very small town feel. I'm on the North Shore of Oahu, so it's very tight. Everybody knows everybody else's business. You see everybody everywhere. We live on a busy street, so when people drive by, they're honking and waving and talking and sometimes stopping by the house. So it's very integrated here. And depending on where you live in the world, your community may look different, but you're still interacting in certain ways. So for me, I really want to have positive interactions with those I see in my community, even though I'm pretty introverted and I don't spend a ton of time with a lot of local people. I still want to have those positive, 5-minute friend interactions that leave them smiling, that, I can say, oh, that was a great wave that you caught, or I love your board, or, something that's very positive and just leaves people with a smile. So as influencers, we've kind of come back to it, okay, we're all influencing. It is a personal responsibility that we understand that influence is affecting every single interaction that we have, for good or for bad, and that every word, every gesture, every single interaction, every look that we put out there is influencing something in our ecosystem. But it all starts with influencing ourselves first. So who are we allowing to influence us? Because this is going to shape how we influence those around us. And I think a lot of us don't really pay enough attention to the input sources that we are allowing to affect how we think. Because we are what we think. If we entertain certain thoughts, if we consume certain types of media, we are going to think in those ways. There's no other way around it. The types of content that you consume is going to affect how you're influencing, and the way that you see the world and the way that you perceive the world is, and the energy that you're putting out there. So I like to think about the different types of input sources that I take in, because if I can harness these to my advantage, then I can be a much more positive influencer. But if I allow the junk food, I would say the junk food sources, to infiltrate my mind, then I'm not going to influence at the level and at the depth that I want to influence others. So when it comes to social media, I try to be really, really cautious about the types of social media that I consume. So for me, when I look in my social feeds, it's really easy to get lost in the scroll. So what I have done is liked a lot of certain posts. So if you want to train algorithms to give you the content that you want, then you like posts that you want to see in your feed. So for me, I have trained the Instagram to show me things that I feel are inspiring and relaxing. So for me, that's surfing. So when I see a bunch of waves in my feed, I'm like, okay, I'm going to scroll through here, but it doesn't feel like junk food. I'm not watching junky news. I'm not watching things that are going to depress me. I'm not just filling my mind with fluff. I really want it to be filled with inspirational things. But I'm also very cautious. My business is on LinkedIn, so I spend a ton of time on social media. So I do need to be cautious about the sources that I'm consuming there. And it can feel very overwhelming, and sometimes I just have to shut it off because it's just too much. I'm like, okay, no more social, so much interaction. But we get those hits of dopamine as we are going through our feeds. And if somebody likes something or comments on something, it's easy to just get engaged. So I think for me, it's really about viewing social media from a healthy perspective and what inspires me, what uplifts me, and making sure that my feed is aligned with that. And if not, then I'm just not going to check the feed. Also email. Sometimes we overlook this, but in our emails, whatever messages we're receiving, whatever, email list that we have signed up for, we're going to get that input and we're going to see it. Whether we open it or not, it's going to show up in our email feed. So I like to pay very close attention to what is coming in. And if something is not serving me, then I unsubscribe. It's really not that hard, but email is something we often overlook or just don't pay attention to. Books and podcasts. Okay, so this is one of my favorites. You're listening to this podcast for a specific reason. And I listen to a lot of podcasts that I enjoy because I want to be inspired. I want to look at things through a different lens. I want to learn something new. Same reason that I read certain types of books. So the types of media that we're consuming is going to affect how we are influencing others. The types of podcasts, it's funny because it's a kind of a running joke around the house. What I always say to Jason is, I was listening to a podcast and ... fill in the blank here. And it's a great way to start good conversations. If you're consuming good content in your podcast feed, if you're listening to I love good audiobooks as well. Jason is great. He listens to a bunch more audiobooks than I ever listened to. And it sparks good conversation. And when you are filling your mind with good books and good media, then you have fun stuff to talk about. Now, news. I really don't like news. I don't listen to any news. The only news I get pretty much is if it's everywhere. Like I can't log on to a social channel and not see it. Or my husband, he kind of keeps up on the news enough so that I don't feel completely in the dark. And he lets me know if there's anything important. And I think the news, though, can be very depressing for a lot of people. So I think figuring out what your ratio of news to other content is can be really helpful in helping you see the world through a more positive lens. Also, friends and family. When you are with people that you care about and that you really want to see succeed, you can influence them, but they're also influencing you. And we've all heard the term and the phrase, you are like the 5 people that you hang around the most. And that is pretty much true. And that includes your family, that includes your friends, that includes the people that are very much interwoven into your life. And so think about those people. Are they influencing you in a positive direction? Or are they kind of pulling you away or kind of poo-pooing your goals or the vision that you have set for your life? And just make sure that they are aligned. And if you need to create a little more distance here, do that because it's really, really important to protect your mindset. And then I think out and about. So we talked a little bit about this, but being at the gym, running errands, going to local shops, being in nature, surfing, exercise, whatever that looks like for you, we are being influenced by the other people that are there. And is that positive for you or is that negative? And how can you shift that to be a bit more on the inspiring end than, the negative Nancy land? So these are some places and ways that we're getting input that if we pay a little more attention to, we can actually create a more positive mindset and we can make more healthy input sources, I guess is how I would say it. So let's tie this back to the mango effect, the name of this podcast, a metaphor. And I kind of see influence as us being a mango tree. So the mango tree is literally just kind of being in one place, but it affects a very large area around it because it provides shade, provides food, In my area, it provides a habitat for the chickens. There are roots that go beneath the surface and could disrupt the septic tank down there. So the mango tree is really a part of an entire ecosystem. And so are we. Even when we think we are not influencing much because we're not on a stage, we don't have a bazillion followers, maybe we're just a new face in our niche, or we simply want to keep a low profile, we're influencing in more ways than we realize. And no mango tree is like self-sufficient. It just doesn't appear out of nowhere and can be in any type of habitat. It has to have very, very specific conditions to thrive. And it's dependent on the nutrients it's receiving from that input in the ecosystem as well. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about, okay, the input and the output of influence. What inputs are you taking in? What outputs are you putting out? So where are you an influencer in your life? Are there places you did not even think that you were influencing, but you're realizing, yeah, you know what? I'm actually influencing quite a bit in that area or with this group of people. And how are you also being influenced? Is there a way for you to start paying more attention to the inputs and the outputs? Can you become a more positive influence, whether you're influencing a small circle at home or in your community, or whether you're aiming to achieve like that national or global impact? I think my challenge to you is to really think about influence this week. Think about, this is really interesting. Like pay attention, a little bit of awareness when you read something or when you hear something and it has an impact and you feel like you have to say something about that, or you're like, I should bookmark that, and you have some type of a reaction to it. That's influence. Whether it's negative or positive or neutral, that is influence. And the more that we are aware of influence happening in our lives, the more that we can use it to our advantage, the more that we can use it to be a positive influence on somebody else. And I think this is incredibly important as we are, as our communities, as our countries, as our nations, as our world is really moving into this next era. Influence is going to be a critical part of how the next generation comes up. And I think we all have a part to play. We all have a role. And if we don't accept that role, if we don't accept that responsibility, then we're not doing the best we can towards this next evolution of whatever our world communities and countries look like. So that's my challenge to you this week. Think about influence. Think about the input. Think about the output. How can you influence and how are you being influenced? And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe to the Mango Effect podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. I'd absolutely love it if you could write a 5-star review for the show if you love it. And we're a new show, so any reviews and subscribes we get will definitely help us as we grow. And if you'd like to connect and take this conversation deeper, you can shoot me a DM on Instagram at Mango Effect Podcast. And I'm really excited about the next show, and I will see all of you, talk to all of you next week. Bye for now.